Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 3 of Leaders of Innovation, the show where we explore the topics and trends impacting accelerator programs and the innovation delivery teams behind them, both here in Australia and also internationally. Today, we are very lucky to be joined by the incredible Lalitha Wemmel, also goes by Lals, from TechStars, joining us all the way from Kuala Lumpur. Currently, Lals is the Regional Director of Community at TechStars for Asia Pacific, where she leads community partnerships and programming of startups ecosystem development across the region. Her role involves balancing a lot of people and then a lot more people. Lalitha leads Startup Weekend Women Global and APAC, alongside being the local lead for Malaysia and Singapore. She is proudly active in the development of women empowerment and diversity and inclusion activities globally. And when Lalitha isn't moving mountains in the world of innovation, she is devouring books and representing Malaysia as an amateur thespian. Lals, you are very welcome.
Hi, Brian. Thank
How
you
are you?
so much for having me.
Yeah, you're
I'm wonderful.
very welcome. So I guess, the first question I ask everybody when they come on is, so what are you working on right now?
Oh my God. Getting through a global pandemic. What are you working on? So much. It's been a very interesting time for us during the last couple of months because of the pandemic. We've had a very open opportunity to really re-innovate a lot of programs that just didn't have the time or the love or the capacity to have that attention. So as much as I'm really sad this is happening around the world, it's provided our team the right kind of avenue to really think about where we can grow and where we can build new resources to deliver the programs that we've always been delivering for the last 10, 15 years in new, interesting, and more impactful ways. So that's really what's been on my plate. And on the side of that, as you know, because obviously as part of the global pandemic, everybody needed a podcast, I also started that.
Hey, go on, get a plug in there.
Yeah.
Where
Happy Messy Founders. That's the podcast.
Happy Messy Founders. Check it out. It's actually pretty good. I listened to it.
So, shut up. Do you really?
Yeah, of course I am. I'm in the ecosystem. How could I miss something good like that? So I guess the big question is, or kind of what you touch on there, is what people have called the pandemic, right? Which is great pause. And it's where people are not necessarily jumping onto the same commuting pattern they've done for many, many years, and where they're actually having an opportunity to step back and think about how they do what they do. Obviously, this is something which at TechStars you guys have been taking advantage of. You've been investing your own time into that. Has there been any kind of big learnings that have come out of reflecting back on those programs during this time?
So I will say, in case you don't know or anybody else listening doesn't know, TechStars was also born out of a pandemic. It was founded in 2006, kind of right before the big 2008 crash. And a lot of our learnings, a lot of where we thrived, a lot of the changes that we made to build the programs that are anchors of what we do today came out of a lot of that uncertainty, because it was really a landscape that allowed us to experiment and test and really build something worth building. Because if you can figure it out, then it's going to thrive after. So this is kind of our second cycle in this field of pandemics. And although it's different, it's really given, like you said, a lot of pause to our teams to think about how do we not just take the programs that we're doing online to take them online, but how do we build experiences that really give the participants of them, whether they're founders, whether they're people coming in to learn about entrepreneurship, whether it's our corporate partners, how do we give all of them the same, if not a better experience than they would have had with us offline? It may not be the same thing, but it could be something that still delivers the value that they wanted to get out of it. I'll use an example, if I can, about a Startup Weekend program that we did in April. So literally at the end of March, we were like, oh no, everything's kind of going crazy. how do we pivot? How do we really help people do these things? Because a lot of our community leaders were coming to us and going, we can't do them offline. We need a way to, still build community, still help founders, still do something. And so in a month, we put together kind of, the MVP, if you will, of what an online version of our programs could be. And we released it out into the wild to just go like, use it, feedback it to us, and we're going to help you guys. We're going to go through the process of building what you want together. And the response that we got was incredible. We, in a month, put together this online program that ended up having 15,000 participants across
Whoa.
55 countries, across 2 weekends. And it was all focused on, I don't want to say the C word, but, the viruses.
Yeah.
Solutions
That his
for,
name shall not be spoken.
it's like Voldemort. Basically solutions for that, for what we're all going through. And it was the most wonderful coming together of so many global communities. And the best part about that is that we had participants who had been part of our offline programs go through this online program, and the feedback was that it felt the same. They got the same, if not better, value. They still felt that they were connected. They still felt they learned a lot. They got to meet a bunch of new people, and they ended the weekend as though they felt they did something incredibly productive. And to us, that meant, okay, we've struck a chord. It's the right path. It's something that we should build on going forth this way. So not thinking that we know exactly what is needed, but making sure it's the most collaborative effort forward that builds something that makes sense for the people that are actually consuming them. So that was a great first validation that we went through.
Yeah, that sounds like a pretty good first validation. First validations go. It actually sounds like a rip-roaring success, to be honest with you. But and it's been a theme, I think, of all these conversations that we've been having is, around the pandemic and the new normal is there's kind of two things that have happened, right? There's a forced evolution. So programs have no choice. They have to evolve or die. And then with that, you've also got the fact that there's an accelerated degree of digital adoption, which actually works quite well, because if the programs have to evolve quickly, the nice thing is that they're not waiting for their audience to decide whether or not they'd like to join. The reality is that everybody's being forced by the same kind of environmental factors, which is huge.
Mm-hmm.
So my big question now would
Exactly.
be, from your seat there in Kuala Lumpur, you're obviously well connected across the Asia Pacific region. What are the trends that you're noticing in the innovation ecosystem across APAC?
So I think over the last couple of years, there were a lot of people that were, first of all, trying to figure out what innovation was. There was an abundance of innovation theater across our region. And I think more and more, as the right players start to come about and the right founders start to lead these discussions, it becomes less about the one day, one off, like we're going to do this program and there's going to be so much excitement and you're going to use all these post-it notes, and it ends there. And I see that there are a lot more legitimate, solid, incredibly well-crafted programs that are being built in Asia, which is amazing. And it's not just programs that are coming from overseas and finding their footing here. Granted, there are a handful of them that are doing a great job. They've come into this region and they've not just copy and pasted what has worked in other countries. They've stopped to think about how the culture is different here, how they can localize it, and how they've built programs that, although provide the same amount of value, fit with how founders are being built here, which is amazing. But it's also really great to see that there are a lot of local programs that are being built out of this same foundation, and it's being led by people in the region as opposed to just people coming in from everywhere else. So I think there are a lot more homegrown programs that are coming in from people who are credible and know what they're talking about. It's not just the one-off. It's not just the excitement of post-it notes, and
Yeah, as you say, it's
really the follow-through.
Yeah, it's not this just the smoke and mirrors. There's actually substance behind it.
Yes.
This is something else which has been coming up too, is the idea of sovereignty or of innovation. So in a world where all of a sudden we discovered that you couldn't really necessarily travel around as much as you might like to, people began to realize that when it came to manufacturing or when it came to ideas or whatever it was, importing them actually just because it was easy wasn't necessarily always the right thing to do. In the new
Mm-hmm.
world, you have to be able to have that sovereignty of innovation, build it at home, have your own ideators and creators. And what you're talking about there
Yeah.
really seems to speak to that.
Yeah, exactly. And I think because there's a limitation on, what you can do and where you can go, you start to basically figure out what you can do in the conditions that you're given, right? What begins in harsh conditions learns to thrive in any condition. And I think that's where, unfortunately and unfortunately, a lot of founders, a lot of programs, a lot of communities have been backed into that corner. And the ones that can find their way out of that corner are going to end up thriving
Hmm.
after this is over.
So positioning for a comeback or a
Yeah.
bounce back.
Yeah. Positioning for brighter days.
I like it. So one of the things that I know, so I've been very lucky to actually sit in a workshop that Lals ran once at PauseFest in Melbourne with Philip Cullen, our friend, Phil from CEA. And, one thing I can talk to is that you obviously have a huge amount of hands-on experience and depth of knowledge when it comes to culture and communities. So if you were thinking about obviously the kind of programs that are being built now across APAC. And if you were speaking to anybody who is kind of looking at their own program and thinking, how do I actually build a really strong culture in the program, but also help founders to do that in their teams too? What kind of advice would you give them?
So, culture is like the hardest thing
Mm,
to build, it's the hardest thing to develop. Um, as part of like the work that we do at Techstars, there's a couple of big categories that we always look at when we go into community building or ecosystem development, and everything else is tangible. Building density is tangible, building capital is tangible. They're all little actionable items that if you work towards, they work. But culture is the most important and the most difficult thing to build, because it's literally changing human habits, it's changing mindsets, it's changing how people perceive things, it's bringing in new experiences and perspectives to affect positive change. Ideally, you can build bad culture, but it's just if you do the
that's
opposite of
easier to
what you
do, I
intend to
think,
do.
than the good culture.
That's much easier. It's much easier. So when we think about culture and how to build them, personally for me, it's a thing that's very close to my heart, because I think over the last couple of years, even just within our small team in APAC, we've gone through a couple of iterations of our own culture. When we started, we were super crazy and hustling and hard on, and we just didn't take care of ourselves. But then as we grew and as our team started to actionably take care of themselves, our culture changed. And that's my biggest learning with culture, is that you can't ever write it down and put it on a wall and expect people to follow it and abide by it. It's never that. Great culture is when your CEO, your manager, your director is not there, but people, teams, employees are still making decisions based on those
Mm,
values and those virtues that are embedded into the DNA of your company.
mm,
Like Techstars, for example, there are tons of things that are written in like our mentor manifesto and what we'd ideally love to do, but the DNA of Techstars is give first. It's just in every decision we make, it's in every employee's mindset. It's so penetrative that no matter what we do, that's always the mindset that we're in, is what we're doing helping founders, is what we're doing giving back to the community, is what we're doing, you know um, being helpful. And
mm.
that ends up being part of every decision that gets made, from a new employee all the way up to our CEO. And that ends up, embedding itself in my own life, in what I do outside of TechStars, and in what I do on a daily basis. And that's a great example of a culture that has stepped out of the books. It's stepped out of the black and white. It's just part of the blood of the company. And
it's in the DNA.
It's in the DNA, exactly. And that, to me, is really the difference between, like, good culture and, like, talking about culture. Because you can talk about culture till the cows come home and nobody will do anything. It's only when your leaders and your team members start taking action and using that culture in their day-to-day that it changes everybody.
Something which I guess always comes up when culture is spoken about. And there was an analogy somebody gave me or said to me once, which I always liked. I'm going to claim it as my own, actually. I like it that much.
Yeah, go for it. I wouldn't know.
Why not? No, I won't tell anybody. I'll edit that part out. So it was like, culture is kind of like a glass of water, right? And it's like, it's transparent when it's a small, new, fresh glass of water. And every time you add somebody in, it's like adding a drop, right? And if you add drops which are of the same values, the water remains transparent, is what it is. But if you start adding kind of negative elements into it, it's very easy for one dark drop of ink, if you like, to change the color of the whole glass of water. So if you've got somebody with a really negative kind of set of values, and all of a sudden they're brought into an organization and they're allowed to continue, if you like, contributing with a very loud voice, it can have a negative impact. So hiring is so important when it comes to culture. What are your thoughts around, and I guess what would you say to innovation teams out there when they're thinking about their hires?
Listen to Brian. I agree 100%.
There's
nothing more to say. There's nothing more to say about that, right? If you're not bringing the right people on your team, if they're not a good fit, it's not going to work out. You can't expect the same kind of culture to compound itself. It's going to be different. It's going to change the DNA of your company. Sometimes irrevocably, right? So hiring and being mindful about hiring is so important.
And hiring, again, I suppose, nicely kind of moves on to the point of diversity, right? So the importance of not having a company that all look the same, sound the same, are just copies of each other, essentially. So that idea of diversity across the workforce and across the people who are making decisions.
Yeah. So when we started, Oko and I don't think you've met Oko, but he's a colleague of mine, and we basically started the community team in APAC together. And we always used to joke that we are, such a great representation of diversity, because we're like literally a 50-50 split. We're a team of two, and one's a guy and one's a girl. And one's a Mongolian who now lives in Singapore, and one is a Malaysian who doesn't sound like she's from Malaysia. And it really, like, over 5.5 years, we look back and we joke about it then and we joke about it now, but we look at the way that we ended up building our community in Asia Pacific, and it speaks for itself. The diversity of perspectives, gender, backgrounds that ended up coming into the fold is just there. We didn't have to make it a thing. We never had to be like, this is our diversity KPI. This is our, this is what we'd like to hit as a goal. It just ended up being that way because the people that were there and were leading it had such different contrasting perspectives to bring to the table, that when we came together to execute, it always ended up being, bringing in new people always and expanding that circle. And so every time we ever had gatherings of our communities, it always showed, there was always a great representation of, like I said, backgrounds, genders, communities, programs, and just industries even that came into play. So when you have a team that already represents that, diversity is never an issue. It just ends up being part of your culture.
Yeah, and that kind of goes back to your DNA point in it, doesn't it? It's like if you're living and breathing it, every day, then it's going to probably become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Whereas if you have
Exactly.
a completely homogenous team, that will probably also be a self-fulfilling prophecy, unless you make a conscious decision to switch it up
Exactly.
a little bit. So, founders, communities, teams, they all have one thing in common, which is that sometimes they're super
Hmm.
stressed and sometimes they are not, right? So it's this roller coaster. And I was talking
You
to,
were talking.
I was talking, go full Irish on you there. So I was talking to Mark Kostowski,
Yeah,
Dave Felicity, you know, Mark G.
I
And
do. That's
he
your
was
rock star.
he is an absolute rock star, and he made the point that um, innovation teams, the delivery teams, actually go on that journey with the founders. So while the
Yes.
founders are having a white knuckled ride, you know, kind of emotional roller coaster, the delivery teams are too.
Hmm.
And that, I suppose, kind of feeds back into that idea of mental health for delivery teams, for the founders, and for the community. I know this is a topic that you know you've thought about and you've spoken on a lot before.
Yeah. Um, that's such an important point. I don't think it's spoken about enough,
Mm,
especially in our region. Um, but it's very true. I think when we talk about mental health, sometimes, people get very afraid to talk about it because it almost seems so extreme.
mm,
But there's so much in between, right? In that roller coaster that you go through. And like you said, it's not just the founders. It's literally everybody going through life. But to bring context to our conversation, just because founders, that topic is spoken about more, it does not diminish the fact that community leaders, program leads, all go through that same journey, because everybody's just working just as hard and
mm,
they're bringing everything of themselves to this table. And burnout is so real. It affects some people so drastically that their health deteriorates. But even minor bits where you can't concentrate and you can't sleep and you can't be as present in a conversation, sometimes all you need to do is step away from whatever you're doing to give yourself that break and reset and recharge to come back. A
mm,
lot of people give credit and um, praise to the hustle culture, which I hate. And I think it's fine for you to do your hustling as much as you need, but the moment your body starts to tell you it can't, you need to listen to it,
mm.
because if not, you're not going to be hustling for much longer. um, Brad Feld, who's a co-founder at TechStars, and he wrote a book, Startup Communities, a while ago. A couple of years ago, we had the opportunity of actually listening to him at one of our like internal staff getaways, and he's really big on talking about founder mental health and like really sharing his own personal journey, where he went through a really bad bout of like depression and burnout. And um, it was so eye-opening to hear from him, because he said something that day that has stuck with me since then. And it is really the difference between work-life balance and work-life harmony.
Mm,
Lots of people give themselves a hard time when they can't find a balance, the exact 50-50 of giving to work and giving to yourself. But life is so messy that you are barely going to find a day where that's the true balance, where you're really doing,
mm.
12 hours of this and 12 hours of that. But his term of recategorizing it as work life harmony really made me look differently at how I was doing my day to day. And it made me feel that I had enough liberty to be like, there are some days where I'm going to go hard and I'm going to hustle a lot, and I'm going to do those like 18-hour whatever days, right? That's ridiculous and crazy. But it's also really okay to go and have a good night's sleep and wake up a bit later and take a little bit of a break the next day, because you've just done I was going
Yeah.
to drop an F-bomb, a crazy amount of work.
It's all right. It's okay.
Right?
I'll put you know, parental advisory on this one.
Thank you. and how it's about finding that harmony where some days you work really hard and some days you take care of yourself really hard.
Mm.
And the important thing is that first you take care of yourself, but secondly that you find a group of people that are going on a similar journey, and you start to talk about all of these things from the get-go. So it's not just when you're going through your crazy bout of burnout that you bring people into your story, because that's the hardest. But if you just start having a conversation honestly with, 2 to 3 people that you trust and you can be yourself around, the chances of them noticing that you're hitting a burnout before you even notice it and helping you catch it and helping you recover from it
Mm.
is so much more there.
Yeah, I think
Have
that's
your
really
own,
good advice. Yeah,
yeah.
because
A
as
friend
you
of
say,
mine, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Miles, I'm interviewing you, so you please do the talking. I'm interrupting you. I'm interrupting your flow. Carry on.
No, I was gonna say, a few days ago we had a conversation with a friend of ours, Stephanie Aerosmith, who does a lot of work in sustainability, but she's also doing a lot of work in like relationship building. And one thing that she started to build is this thing that she calls a peer advisory board. So as much as you have mentors for your startup, what's stopping you from having that advisory board for yourself and making sure that you have people that you can reflect on and be with and talk about yourself and
Mm.
holding that space for them to do it as well. And you have to really think about that curation, but once you do, it starts to have a very natural flow, and it's going to be as wonderful for you as a mentor is for your startup.
I think that's great advice. I mean, at the end of the day, if you're gonna,
Thanks, Brian.
well, I mean, if you take your car for a service and look after that, and that's a hunk of metal, so why wouldn't you kind of like book in this kind of cyclical checkup with your peer advisory board and just kind of like check
Exactly.
in and have that conversation. And I think for an analogy, it's like that idea of going to a well and just drawing buckets of water. And if you keep on doing it, eventually the well needs time to fill back up. And if you don't
Mhm.
give it a chance, you're just going to start taking mud, gunk out
Yeah.
of that well. So you have to step back and allow it kind of, to fill back up to the point where actually it's usable again without,
Hmm.
hurting you, if you like, because you're going back and kind of trying to hustle a little bit too much. So I quite like that.
Exactly.
So here's a question for you. If you had 3 tips for somebody who is designing a program today, so they're heading
Hmm.
out, they're going to design an innovation program, what would they be? What would be the 3 tips that you'd give to them?
Find the right people that you want to start this journey with. That's number one. Um, really think about what you want to do in this situation and what you want to do beyond it. Because, like we talked about earlier, if you're able to build a program that delivers value right now, you are going to thrive after this.
Hmm.
And the last thing is following through. So don't just do the program, don't just have the day off or the couple of weeks that you do. Build your community around it, follow through, make sure that the founders that are going through your program, the partners that you have in it are involved, and you are building culture from day one that embeds itself beyond the program.
I like it. So the 3 tips are: pick the right people to go on the journey with, make sure you've got a plan for not just the program, but what you're going to do after the program. And then number 3, it was
Follow through,
follow through.
build the right culture,
There you go.
follow
Ironically, I
through.
was like, number 3, what is it? And you're like, follow through. That's 3 really good points. And I think, like everything, when people are designing and building programs, just like founders, they have a lot going on. And it's
Mhm.
very easy to lose sight of maybe what the priorities and the focuses are. So they're really good guiding stars for them to have when they go through. So it has been a tumultuous and exciting 12 months. I know I met you in Melbourne, and I'm only going to ask you how many countries you've been to in the last 12 months, because pre-COVID, I know you're pretty mobile around, kind of travel. My
Mhm.
question is, out of that 12 months, what's your biggest learning this year, the last 12?
Oh, that's so difficult because the first 6 months of that was normal. And the last 6 months of that were
Anything
insane.
but.
Anything but normal. My biggest learning, that's a really good question. Can I take a minute? Can
Yeah,
you edit this
absolutely.
out? Okay.
Yeah. Now it can be a, if you want, it can be like a personal takeaway, so it can be a reflective
Yeah,
one, or if you like, it can be a professional one. So you can be like, actually, I've learned that, whatever
yeah.
you want.
I think it's going to be a personal one.
Yeah, perfect.
So I will say that my biggest uh, takeaway and difference is really how much more I'm taking care of myself,
Mm.
because during this pandemic, I haven't had a chance to escape, right? And people know that you're at home. People know you're at home. There's nowhere for you to go. There's no like distance that you can put between yourself, the workday, the time zones, the to-do lists. And it's really, really important to know that just because you don't have somewhere to go or somewhere you can escape, it shouldn't stop you from taking your weekends seriously, your evenings seriously, and your time off seriously. And it should never be, about where you're going so hard and you only take like 2 weeks out of a year to recover. It should be a practice that you're having all the time. So putting boundaries that I've now been much more strict with, setting expectations with people about when I'm available and what I can do, especially if you're working with a remote and global team where time zones are kind of very, very fluid.
Mm.
And making sure that even your day to day, you're doing your very best to take care of yourself. I try very hard to get at least 8 hours of sleep a day. I try to make sure I exercise at least like 5 times a week. And it's not anything intense, right? It's like maybe going for a walk in the morning just to get
Yeah.
your blood flowing because you're sitting in front of the computer for the rest of the day. And, you know, uh, planning little things that bring you joy, because when I was traveling a lot, I would make sure I embed at least like a day before or a day after any work trip that I do to like reset and recover and have some time to like enjoy this beautiful place that I've had the luxury and opportunity and pleasure of going to. But it's very hard to do that when it's just Zoom meeting after Zoom meeting after Zoom
Oh yeah.
meeting.
Yeah. Zoom hangover is what I call it. It's when you step
Yeah,
up from your desk and you think it feels like you've been out for the night or something. It's just, whew, like,
exactly.
yeah. I think that's very, very true, and especially in the innovation ecosystem where
Yeah,
a lot of people don't clock out at 5 o'clock. It's not the mentality that many people have, be it imagined or real or whatever the case may be. And I know personally, I mean, you talk about time zones. There's been days where I would have a call in America, then I'd be talking to people in Australia, then I'd be talking to people in the Middle East,
mhm.
and then I'd be talking to customers in Europe. And at the end of the day, I would literally be joking about getting deep vein thrombosis from sitting in the same place. It was like being on a long haul flight, working all day at the desk. So I've done exactly what you said there. I've kind of always tried to consciously work in, even if it's just a walk around the block
Yeah,
for 5 minutes. So important. So your learning is being conscious this year about taking care of yourself and planning in
yes,
advance for how you're going to do that.
yes,
I like it.
as much as I can.
So crystal ball time. Break out your crystal ball. I know you've got it there in
Oh
the drawer of your
no.
desk or something. So here's a tough one for you. So you're now sitting in July 2022, and you're gazing across the APAC region. What does the innovation ecosystem look like in 2 years' time? And everybody's been asked this question who's been on so far. So
God damn
yeah, no
it. I bet they
pressure.
had like really great answers. I feel like I'm repeating myself a lot, but um, taking a step back,
Mhm.
just looking at the pandemic as it is now, Asia is on the cusp of like the fastest recovery. Asia Pacific, right? So this whole region, which means I look at it as some of the most iconic, revolutionary programs and ideas are going to stem from this region, just because of how we've looked at it, the pace in which we're going to get back to some version of normal very soon. I mean, even thinking about how countries are, and not just about innovation programs, but how countries are looking at jumpstarting their economies is already an exercise in innovation. Like, I'm so proud of our region. I'm so grateful that I'm here. And I really don't know what it's going to look like. I know that there's definitely going to be industries that are going to be focused on it and thriving in, right? If you can find interesting ideas and solutions on all of the industries that got hit right now, I would say that there will be a focus on that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think that there are going to be some incredible solutions, and the shift of where the powerhouses of economies are going to be in the next 2 years will fall heavily in this region.
I like that. So what I'm hearing is it could be APAC's time to shine. 2 years, again, not for the first time, but another time for APAC to shine. Because as you say, the pandemic has to date hit the region and be managed in the region very differently from some other bigger and many other kind of, obviously APAC's quite broad, so it's got a whole spectrum of maturity in economies, which means that there's a huge amount of variation there in terms of possibilities. That's quite exciting, and I like that because that's a positive answer.
We have a window, and our time is now, and the rewards are going to go to people who survive it.
Climb through the window. That's what I'm hearing.
Climb through the window.
So final question for you, Lals. Congratulations.
That wasn't the final one?
No. That's the second last one. I'll give you the last one. It's a trick question.
All right.
But this is the real last question. So congratulations. Here's a check for $500,000. Now, you can use this imaginary check to set up a program in any niche, any startup tech niche or industry. What kind of industry niche would you choose and why?
So I have an answer for this because I do want to work on this, and it's something I've been thinking about for a while, and it is on well-being. So that's the industry I would go into, and it would focus on experiential learning because that's what I'm an expert in, and it would build champions for life and not just champions in winning.
That's a really interesting concept. So when you say champions for life rather than champions for winning, what does that mean?
It's like human 101. You think everything is obvious, and you think everybody has all of the tools that they need to thrive, but they don't. And you learn the best when you go through an experience. And so I would think about how am I able to create wholesome champions that are thriving. And it would focus mainly on founders, but it could be applied in a lot of different places.
I love it. So well-being, focusing on experiential learning. Phenomenal. This is great. I've had a different answer to that question every single time, so I'm really enjoying this.
You're going to just start investing in all of these different industries.
I'm going to open a fund off the back of this. I'll go to a couple of big family offices and I'll say, I've got a whole group of great ideas. But no, it's actually really interesting because everybody who's come on the show comes from a slightly different background, in terms of their own experience. And it's fascinating kind of just seeing where different people would choose to, invest that $500,000, because it's enough money to get started. It's not enough money to, run a luxurious program. Would definitely have to deliver results. So I'm really enjoying the horizon. Lals, you are an absolutely wonderful human being. Thank you very much for giving us the time today. I'm in cold Melbourne, so I'm just curious, what is the weather like outside there today in Kuala Lumpur?
Oh, it's very shiny, as you can see from my window.
As you can see from behind me with the skyline.
As you can see from behind me, it's about 30 degrees.
Oh, you're making me
sunny and 30, and I'm only in a sweater because my room is so cold.
Because the aircon's on, right?
Yeah.
All right.
I was trying to make you feel more comfortable. Like I was in Melbourne too.
I thought you were going for like actual like Irish weather. That's why you're like saying you're trying to make me feel comfortable by
I would
wearing a
need
jumper.
like 7 more coats, I think.
Niles, thank you so much. It is always a pleasure and never ever not insightful. So I really do appreciate your time.
Thank
And
you, Brian. Thank you for having me.
not at all. It's a real pleasure. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon and thank you again.